So Max, thank you very much for that inspiring and eloquent toast to the memory of our patron, of Sir Walter Scott himself. Delighted to hear you mention the fishing of the Tweed. I would like to know, I would dearly like to know, if Tom Purdie, Walter Scott's factotum, manager of the estate of Abbotsford, keeper of the library, I would love to know if anything remains of him above the ground, because I would then immediately do a DNA test to see if I was his descendant. We share the same surname, and we are a small but extremely nasty border clan, going back several generations to Max, and my ancestors of those days being deeply committed not only to the borders activities of theft, assault, arson, and culpable homicide, but a deep commitment, like many of yours too, to the great central commercial activity of the borders, which we may diplomatically describe as the cross-border livestock transportation. Tom Purdie met Sir Walter Scott in court. He was accused of poaching, correctly, poaching on the Tweed. And you may not know this, but it's worth remembering for yourself as a fisher that the exchange between Scott on the bench as Sheriff of Selkirkshire and Tom Purdie was quite a classic. He was found guilty and fined. Purdie immediately asked, "Time to pay, my lord, time to pay." And Scott said, "How much time do you need?" "I don't know, my lord." And Scott said, "Well, why don't you know?" And Purdie said, "My lord, it depends how the salmon are running." Long may you enjoy the Tweed, as did Tom Purdie and Sir Walter in the olden days. The next toast is a formal toast, given without oratory. So please now, would you please all, ladies and gentlemen, charge your glasses and be upstanding for the formal toast, City of Edinburgh. City of Edinburgh. Thank you. To reply, it's a great pleasure now to call upon the Lord Provost. The Right Honourable Donald Wilson, Lord Lieutenant and Lord Provost of Edinburgh, is a borderer, born in Selkirk and educated at Galashiels Academy and Stirling University. His BSc being followed by a Mastership in Information Science and from London City University, and a teaching qualification here in Edinburgh from Murray House. He taught computing at Newbattle Community High School before being elected to the City of Edinburgh Council for Shandon Ward. The Lord Provost served on a wide range of City Council committees and is the Council's assessor on the court of the University of Edinburgh. He has chaired the Edinburgh Lothians Tourist Board and the Edinburgh International Science Festival, very dear to my heart, the latter illustrating his continuing interest in computer science, as does his active interest in Edinburgh's International Centre for Mathematical Sciences, jointly owned by Heriot Watt and Edinburgh Universities, and which organises workshops and conferences in all areas of mathematics. To respond to the toast, City of Edinburgh, the Lord Provost.
I realised the toast to the city was formal, so I was expecting I had another 10 minutes at least. Your Grace, my Lord, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be here today to reply to the toast to the City of Edinburgh. I think I had to think about what I was going to say in terms of Edinburgh, but before I say that, of course, in terms of Scott, I grew up with Sir Walter Scott, in a sense, because I'm originally from Selkirk, as you've heard, and which is very near Abbotsford. And so for me, I've been to Abbotsford more times than I can remember. I feel as though very much I've grown up with Sir Walter Scott as a part of my upbringing and a part of my traditions. For Scott, Edinburgh was my own romantic town. He lived and worked here for much of his life. Edinburgh fueled his imagination. He found the inspiration for his poems and novels in the city's history and traditions, her buildings, her people, and her social and domestic life. Scott enjoyed walking around the city. In fact, he did this every day, if possible, when he was in the city. Even in preference to other forms of transport, he enjoyed meeting the characters and experiencing the life of the city. He especially liked evening walks, and he did this until he was too old to do so, indeed almost till his death. He probably would have shunned even the trams. Wait a minute, I wasn't going to mention the trams, but I've done it now. For example, an example of Sir Walter Scott championing Scotland and its capital city was the attempt from London to take away the Scottish £5 note. Scott engaged in one of the earliest forms of viral campaigns in history and proved that he was years ahead of his time in terms of the social media. So it's ironic we had about Kindle earlier. Basically, he kept writing letter upon letter until the decision was reversed. If he'd been around today, maybe we would still have had the Scottish £1 note, which is much lamented. Another example was the visit of George IV, which he orchestrated. He orchestrated particularly the presentation of the Highland chieftains to the King, taking account of Edinburgh's society at the time. Apparently this only took him 3 weeks to organise, which is really an achievement. Unfortunately, he also insisted that everyone at the reception in the castle took home their own glass that they used. I say unfortunately because Scott put his in his back pocket and then sat on it, and which resulted in most of it having to be retrieved from his body at a later date. He is of course famous for having rediscovered the honours of Scotland in a trunk in Edinburgh Castle. There's a picture in the European room in the city chambers which depicts James II wearing the Scottish honours crown jewels. We point this out to visitors when we're showing them around the city chambers as the only surviving crown jewels in the United Kingdom, by which of course we mean that the English ones were lost and then reformed, so they are in fact the British crown jewels, whereas the Scottish ones are the originals, which is partly because they were lost for so long and then found. And for that, of course, we owe that to Sir Walter Scott. The city takes pride in looking after two properties closely associated with Scott: the Writers' Museum and the Scott Monument. The Writers' Museum is dedicated to three of Scotland's greatest writers: Sir Walter Scott, Robert Burns and Robert Louis Stevenson. And I was thinking earlier, we actually have descendants of at least two of those in the room. I don't know, of course, what we know about Robert Burns. We probably have the descendants of all three in the room, if the truth were known. In the museum, visitors can find out more about Scott through portraits, manuscripts, books and artefacts, including the rocking horse Scott used as a child, with one footrest, and another, of course, to take account of his lameness, and a chess set, his chess set, although he himself said, "Surely chess playing is a sad waste of brains," and a dining table from his home in Castle Street, given to his lawyer in part payment of legal expenses following Scott's bankruptcy in 1826. Outside the Writers' Museum is Makars Court, a growing national literary monument. On Scott's commemorative stone there is a map of Scotland, over which are the much quoted words, "This is my own, my native land." The Scott Monument probably is the best known building in Edinburgh next to the castle. It's been described as the finest anywhere on earth to the memory of a man of letters. At 61 metres high, it's certainly the tallest. And I certainly know that because one of the first things I did on visiting Edinburgh as a boy was to attempt to run up the steps that lead up to the top of the Scots Monument. I certainly won't be doing that now. In 2012, the Writers' Museum welcomed over 42,000 visitors and over 75,000 people visited the Scott Monument. A great indication of the draw of Edinburgh's literary heritage to visitors at home and abroad. There are many references to the city in Marmion and Waverley, but the one novel most closely associated with Edinburgh surely has to be Heart Midlothian, with its striking description of the Porteous riot. I've not got around to reading Heart Midlothian yet, and I did have to say that I did look up the Porteous riot, and I resolved that after looking at Purdie about it, I was never going to read about it again. It's the most horrific story I've ever seen in my life. And indeed, the Lord Provost doesn't count it about that well. So we'll just gloss quickly over that one. On the subject, however, one of my prized possessions since coming to be Lord Provost is this copy of Sir Walter Scott Heart Midlothian, and it was given to me after the cup final, and it's been signed by all the players of Hearts, Heart Midlothian Football Club. So it seemed significant to me that they would choose this as a gift to give me as Lord Provost of the city. So I know that I've impressed half the audience and the opposite for the rest, but can't please all the people. Sir Walter Scott was a writer of prodigious output who gained prestige and influence both nationally and internationally. I'm therefore delighted to be with you this evening to celebrate his contribution to Edinburgh, the world's first UNESCO City of Literature, where he remains today such a strong and notable figure in our literary heritage. Thank you.